Officer Thomas Harrington issues a ticket to a black driver, unaware that this man is his new supervisor. This misstep will turn his world upside down and force him to confront systemic injustice head-on. What happens next will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start at the beginning. Officer Thomas Harrington felt as confident and composed as ever. Mornings at the precinct were routine. A quick briefing, strong coffee, and some light-hearted discussions of recent news with colleagues. As an officer with many years of service, Thomas was accustomed to his schedule and was certain he knew exactly who he'd encounter on duty. His confidence grew as he noticed a massive black SUV carelessly parked in a spot designated for higher-ups near the precinct. Someone clearly doesn't know where they're supposed to park, thought Thomas as he approached the vehicle. The SUV looked so expensive and audacious that he began speculating about its owner. Maybe a criminal, a drug dealer, or just an arrogant passerby, unfamiliar with respecting the rules. As he reached the vehicle, Thomas pulled out his ticket book. With cold determination, he began writing the citation, convinced he was doing his job. At that moment, he heard a calm voice behind him. "Good morning, officer. Is something wrong?" Thomas turned slowly and saw a man standing there, a tall, stately figure in a perfectly tailored suit. The man appeared to be around 40, with a calm, slightly curious expression. Thomas scanned him with a suspicious gaze, noting his expensive, confident appearance, which only strengthened his suspicions. With a slight sneer, he responded, "There aren't enough parking spots for everyone to park here," Thomas said, barely concealing his irritation. "Especially not for people like you." The man frowned slightly but remained calm. "This spot was only free for a few minutes when I arrived. I didn't think it would be an issue." Feeling his mood souring, Thomas lifted his chin and replied with mild sarcasm. "A few minutes, you say? For a car like yours, you need special permission, not just a few minutes. Where'd you get that kind of money? Surely you understand that not everyone can afford a car like that. Or do you, shall we say, have an illegal source of income?" A flicker of annoyance crossed the man's face, but he responded with the same calm, even tone. "Not at all, officer. I don't work illegally. I'm your new employee. My name is Daniel Mitchell, recently appointed Director of Community Relations. I came in this morning to familiarize myself with the precinct and speak with colleagues." At that moment, Thomas froze for a second. He suddenly realized that this self-assured man was not just another passerby. This was their new supervisor, whom his colleagues had been eager to see in person. But not wanting to show his surprise, he quickly suppressed his reaction, maintaining a cold expression. "Well, Mr. Mitchell," he said with a restrained smile, "welcome aboard. But next time, make sure to park in an authorized spot. We strive to keep order here." Daniel Mitchell nodded with composure, though his eyes revealed slight irritation. "Noted. Thank you for the reminder, Officer Harrington." Thomas gave a casual salute and turning sharply walked away, feeling a strange satisfaction in having put this man in his place. He felt confident that this wealthy, self-assured man wouldn't adapt to their strict rules and probably wouldn't last long. He was so used to operating by his own established ways that he failed to notice the expression on Daniel's face. Left alone, Daniel took a deep breath to calm himself, suppressing both anger and frustration. Today, he'd chosen to hold back from addressing the situation fully. But soon, Harrington would realize that this was far from their last encounter. Daniel was determined to make significant changes here, and he knew it had to start with officers like Thomas. The next day, the precinct buzzed with activity. All staff were gathered in the assembly hall to meet the new Director of Community Relations. Officer Harrington, seated in the back row, had already shared his story about yesterday's incident with the expensive SUV and was confident that his superiors would appreciate the order he had enforced in the parking lot. But his mood shifted when the very man he had disciplined yesterday stepped onto the stage. Daniel Mitchell looked composed, but his gaze lingered on Harrington a few seconds longer than on the others, causing Thomas to tense up slightly before he quickly averted his eyes to maintain a calm demeanor. Daniel began with a brief introduction, emphasizing that his primary goal was to rebuild trust in the police, especially in communities where relations with law enforcement had become strained. His speech was calm and confident, yet every word carried a firm resolve. Thomas sensed his colleagues exchanging glances. It was clear the new supervisor intended to change the status quo. "In our precinct," Daniel stated, "we have a high standard of accountability, but sometimes bias overshadows that standard. Bias creates barriers, undermines trust, and harms the reputation of our department. We'll work to ensure that every officer understands that all residents, regardless of skin color or social standing, deserve respect." Daniel's words hit the mark, causing Thomas to shift uneasily. It was clear that the new boss knew about yesterday's incident and was subtly referring to it, though he didn't mention any names. Thomas suppressed his growing discomfort, dismissing the speech as mere rhetoric, convinced that the newcomer wouldn't be able to take any serious action. After the meeting, Daniel invited everyone to individual sessions to discuss their responsibilities. When Thomas's turn came, he entered the office, determined to stay confident. But upon seeing Mitchell's face, he realized this conversation would be more serious than he anticipated. "Officer Harrington," Daniel began, seating himself across from him, "I heard about your dedication yesterday. Ticketing is indeed part of maintaining order. However, in this case, I believe a bit of leniency could have sufficed, especially since I'd only parked briefly in front of the precinct." Thomas pursed his lips, concealing his irritation. "Rules apply to everyone, sir. I'm just doing my job, and if I may say so, I think we should set an example, regardless of rank." Daniel's expression didn't change, but his eyes were firm. "Excellent, officer. I admire your commitment to rules. I, too, believe they apply to everyone. So I want you to know that from now on, I'll ensure our officers adhere to them in every way, including interactions with the public. We can't allow people to be treated differently based on their appearance or assumptions." These words struck Thomas harder than he expected. His face grew serious. He realized that the new boss was determined and that yesterday's incident was more than just a minor annoyance. An unsettling feeling grew within him that his familiar routine at the precinct was being undermined, and he might need to adapt to new expectations. As he left the office, his mind was racing with thoughts of the changes he hadn't anticipated and perhaps wasn't ready to accept. The situation intensified as Daniel Mitchell began enforcing strict rules for all employees. He insisted on a more mindful approach toward the community, presenting data on complaints related to biased police treatment of black neighborhoods. He introduced mandatory bias awareness training, which sparked frustration among senior officers, including Harrington, who considered himself a seasoned professional, not a rookie in need of retraining. More and more, Thomas felt uncomfortable. His usual methods, which had once been the norm, were now under scrutiny. Daniel never openly mentioned the previous day's incident, but his leadership increasingly addressed issues surrounding bias. Each time Thomas encountered Daniel, whether in meetings or on patrol, he felt as if his actions were under unrelenting observation. One day, while on patrol, Thomas noticed two teenagers, one of them black, having a loud argument outside a store. He immediately stepped forward, intending to intervene. But Daniel, who was nearby, gestured for Thomas to wait, approached the teens himself, listened to them calmly, and resolved the conflict without resorting to force. This rattled Thomas, who believed that such leniency made the police look weak. Unable to contain himself, Thomas confronted Daniel afterward. "Listen, we're not social workers. We're the police, and when someone breaks the law, they need to be held accountable." Daniel looked at him calmly, unwavering. "Accountability is important, but it's also crucial to remember that we serve the community, not control it. Our methods should reflect that, Thomas. If we can resolve something without aggression and accusations, why shouldn't we?" Thomas felt a surge of frustration. This new leader was undermining the very essence of his work, and he felt his authority slipping away. Just yesterday, he could have arrested a teenager on suspicion of aggressive behavior, but now, his own boss was holding him back. He turned away, struggling to contain his irritation, but the inner conflict was growing. Days passed, and with each passing day, the tension only grew. Thomas's colleagues, who had once shared his views, began changing under Daniel's new regulations. Some even expressed support for the reforms their new boss was implementing. Soon, a rumor spread that Daniel Mitchell was preparing a report on the department's operations and would present it to the city council with recommendations for changing police methods. For Thomas, this was the last straw. He realized that the situation was spiraling out of control and decided to take action. Thomas made a decision. He would confront Daniel's new policies head-on. After gathering his arguments, he went to the supervisor's office, intending to explain why these methods wouldn't work in real policing. But when he walked in, he saw several employees who supported Daniel were already there. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. His idea of discipline and order was no longer the only perspective. When the meeting started, Daniel brought up the topic of police effectiveness, explaining that the hardline methods used in the past had alienated many community members. He presented real examples, citizen complaints, cases of excessive detainment, and a low level of public trust. Thomas couldn't hold back. "We're here to enforce order, not to appease everyone who complains. Daniel, maybe you're used to office work, but the streets require a different kind of discipline." Daniel remained calm, but answered firmly and resolutely. "Thomas, discipline is needed, but respect and trust are even more important. Police officers should protect people, not control them through fear. We serve society, and if our methods don't reflect that, it's time to change them." A tense silence filled the room. Thomas noticed some colleagues nodding in agreement with Daniel. He felt isolated, as though his entire belief system was crumbling before him. The internal conflict reached a peak, and he unexpectedly said, "Maybe you're right, but you'll have to prove it, not just to me, but to everyone who's used to doing things the way we were taught." Daniel nodded with a slight smile. "Agreed. Time will show that these new methods not only work, but make us stronger. For now, let's start by all reflecting on how we can change our approach toward people." From that day on, much changed. Officers began interacting more thoughtfully with people on the streets, and Thomas gradually realized that his notions of discipline could be adapted to the new principles. His usual approach to work evolved, but he remained dedicated to service, finding a new balance between his high standards and respect for citizens. In the end, Thomas understood that Daniel's reforms weren't undermining his work. They were making it stronger and fairer.